Dzień dobry Państwu, witam Państwa serdecznie.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Marcin, Waszak, and I represent Forum Idei, the ideaForum of the Batory Foundation. This is the second day of our conference devoted to Integrity Pact and the EU results and perspectives. Yesterday, we said a couple of words about what the pact is, how it is evaluated by institutions and companies that were engaged in implementing the pact in Poland. Today, we'll give you a look at what was happening abroad when it comes to the pact. We will focus on the role of citizens themselves in supervising public tenders. We'll try to focus on how to engage people, how to make citizens more interested in monitoring the spending of public funds under public tenders in the EU. We'll try to look at good practices that could be replicated in other countries. And last but not least, we will ask the question, what's next? What can be done after the Integrity Pact is over? This conference is a summary of a certain chapter. What can we do to strengthen the role of civic society when it comes to monitoring and supervision of public tenders and protection of public funds, public and EU funds as well? Together with us, we have a group of outstanding guests. And without further ado, I'll immediately hand over to an introductory round. I will just for informational purposes tell you that the conference is streamed via Facebook account of the Batory Foundation in Polish, and you can also tune in the YouTube channel of the foundation to listen to it in English. Both these channels will give you the opportunity to ask questions to our panelists. My colleague will be updating the list of questions and forwarding them to me. As soon as we have any questions, I'll try to pass them to our guests. And now, without further ado, who's with us here who agreed to accept our invitation? And this is a big thank you to all the people present. These are excellent speakers. So let me introduce to you Rafael Garcia Aceves from Transparency International Secretariat. In Transparency International, he is Transparency International is the coordinator of Integrity Pact in Europe. In Transparency International, Rafael is responsible for public tenders policy for over a decade. He has been specializing in combating corruption as an element of public management. He was working on the concept of open government from the another perspective, i.e. using data technologies and social engagement in order to improve the quality of public services and the quality of institutions. Before joining Transparency International, he was the director for open contracts in Mexico City, where he designed and tested the model for public tender planning in cooperation with the private sector and citizens. He's got a diploma from the London School of Economics. He graduated in data science in social studies. Thank you for being with us, Rafa. Now, moving on to our second guest,
Dr. Mahmoud Farag.
Dr. Mahmoud Farag, Associate Professor in the Institute of Political Studies at the University of Zurich.
Pracuje jako konsultant również związany z Transparency International.
Mahmoud is
Secretariat, gdzie doradza właśnie w aspekcie
he's working in the field of accountability,
procesów związanych z zamówieniami publicznymi
and processes related to public procurement, as well as cooperation with citizens in that very context. Moreover, he's got over 12 years of experience when it comes to working and advising social organizations, civic organizations in the field of civic engagement. as well as human rights.
Wcześniej współpracował między innymi z takimi organizacjami
Before
społeczeństwa
that, he worked
obywatelskiego jak
with
Accountable Now,
CSOs
Care
such as
International
Accountable
UK,
Now, Care
czy
International UK,
Międzynarodową Organizacją
or
do spraw
the IMO, the International
migracji.
Migration
Tak
Organization.
już wspomniałem, Mahmoud posiada tytuł doktora nauk
As I
politycznych,
mentioned,
który odebrał
he's
na
got a
Uniwersytecie Humboldta
doctoral
w
title
Berlinie.
in
Witam cię,
political
Mahmoud,
studies from the
serdecznie.
Humboldt University in Berlin. Hello, Mahmoud. Glad to have you with
Teraz
us.
przedstawię
Now
panią
let me introduce to
Katarzynę
you
Kaźmierczak,
Madam Katarzyna Kaźmierczak.
wójt gminy Poraj.
She's the reeve of
Pani Katarzyna
Poraj commune.
jest z zawodu nauczycielem dyplomowanym.
Katarzyna
i
is a
samorządowcem
teacher
z
by
wieloletnim
profession.
stażem i bardzo dużym
She has been
dorobkiem.
working
Od
in the
2010
local
roku
authorities area for a long
była
time.
przewodniczącą Rady Gminy
Since
Poraj. Od
2010, he was the head
2016
of the
wicewójtem
communal
gminy Poraj,
council
a
in
w
Poraj
2019
and the deputy
roku
reeve.
wygrała
In
wybory na wójta
2019, she won the
gminy
local elections and
Poraj.
became the reeve of
Jest
Poraj
też bardzo
commune.
zaangażowana w
She's
działalność
very engaged in
porajskich organizacji i stowarzyszeń
local
społecznych. My
authorities
mieliśmy
and
poznać,
associations.
przyjemność poznać panią wójt
We
przy
had a
okazji
pleasure
realizacji
to
własnego monitoringu
meet her
w ramach
personally
Polskiego Paktu
when we were doing our own
Uczciwości.
monitoring under the umbrella of the
I
Polish
myślę, że
Integrity
będzie
Pact.
okazja też
I think that
na temat tego epizodu naszego projektu
we will have a
chwilę
chance
powiedzieć, bo
about
on
this
też niesie ze sobą
episode,
bardzo
if you like, of our project.
pouczające wnioski. Pani
There are many
wójt,
lessons
bardzo
that we
dziękuję
can
za
learn from it.
przyjęcie
Madam,
zaproszenia i
thank you
oczywiście
for
witam panią
accepting
serdecznie
our
również w
invitation.
naszym panelu.
Hello, so glad to have you
Dzień
here on the
dobry.
panel.
Chciałbym również przedstawić
Good
dr.
morning.
Irinę
I would
Lonean
also
z
like to introduce to
Transparency
you Dr.
International,
Irina Lonean from Transparency International
Rumunia, z oddziału rumuńskiego
Romania.
Transparency International. Irina jest doktorem nauk politycznych, wykształciła
She
się
has
na
a doctoral title
Uniwersytecie
in
Libre
political
de
studies
Bruxelles oraz
from
na
the
Uniwersytecie w Bukareszcie.
Université Libre
Posiada
de
też licencjat prawa i
Bruxelles
stara
and the
się łączyć
Bucharest
ten
University.
swój dorobek
She's also
naukowy
got
i
a bachelor's
działalność
degree
naukową
in
właśnie
law. She's trying to combine her scientific and academic
też z działalnością
work
zawodową.
with the
Od
professional
ponad
activity.
14 lat
Over
pracuje w
14
rumuńskich
years,
i
she has
międzynarodowych
been
organizacjach
working for
pozarządowych,
Romanian and international
których
NGOs.
misją i celem jest właśnie wspieranie demokracji,
This mission and goal is
praworządności,
to promote democracy, rule of
też
law,
angażowanie
and
czy zwiększanie uczestnictwa młodzieży w takiej
increasing the participation of
partycypacji
youth
obywatelskiej, a też proponowanie
civic
rozwiązań politycznych
projects.
opartych właśnie na badaniach.
The organizations she worked for
Irina,
propose political solutions which
oprócz
are
tego, że ma
based on
imponujące
research. Apart from
wykształcenie,
having
to też ma
impressive
imponujący
education,
dorobek, jeśli chodzi o
Irina
prowadzenie
also
samych
has
paktów
very
uczciwości,
impressive
bo
achievements when it comes to
nadzoruje,
Integrity Pacts.
jakby zarządza aż 3 paktami
He
uczciwości, które są
manages
prowadzone
the 3 Integrity
w
Pacts
Rumunii, więc na pewno też
in Romania,
ma bardzo
and
duże
I'm sure
doświadczenie w tym zakresie, którym na pewno
she
się
has
też z nami
extensive
dzisiaj
experience that
chętnie
she'll be more than
podzieli.
happy to
Także
share
witam
with
Cię,
us
Irina,
today.
również dziękuję za
Hi,
przyjęcie
Irina.
zaproszenia.
Thanks for accepting our invitation.
I na koniec
And last
profesor
but
Grzegorz
not least,
Makowski,
Professor
którego znają
Grzegorz
Państwo
Makowski.
ze wczorajszej sesji. Grzegorz był
You
wczoraj
know him from
jednym
yesterday's
z
session.
panelistów,
Yesterday,
a
Grzegorz was one of the
dzisiaj,
panelists.
to znaczy był moderatorem, a dzisiaj jest jednym z panelistów.
The speaker corrected himself. Grzegorz was yesterday our
jest
moderator.
kierownikiem
Now he
Polskiego
is a
Paktu
panelist
Uczciwości,
member. He
więc
is the
głównie w tej roli dzisiaj
head of
występuje,
the
ale jest
Polish
też
Integrity Pact, so
doktorem
that's the hat
habilitowanym
that
w
he is wearing
socjologii,
today. He's
ekspertem Forum
also
Idei Fundacji
got a
Batorego,
doctoral
naukowo związany
title
z
in
Kolegium
sociology. He is an expert of
Ekonomiczno-Społecznym
Forum
Szkoły
Idei,
Głównej
associate
handlowej
professor in
w
the Economic
Warszawie,
and Social College of Warsaw
naukowo
School of
i
Economics.
też z racji pracy w Fundacji
When it
Batorego
comes to
zajmuje się
his scholarly
zagadnieniem
work and
przeciwdziałania
his engagement
korupcji,
with the Stefan
rozwojem
Batory
społeczeństwa
Foundation,
obywatelskiego
he
i
focuses on
sytuacją
anti-corruption,
organizacji
development of civic
pozarządowych. Autor
society,
bardzo
and the
wielu
situation
książek,
of NGOs.
artykułów naukowych i
He's the
tekstów
author of
publicystycznych, w tym też
numerous
poświęconych samemu
books,
paktowi.
monographs,
Witam
articles,
Cię, Grzegorz,
also
serdecznie.
devoted to the pact itself. Hi Grzegorz, glad to have you.
Bardzo się cieszę na taki skład panelu,
We are
jaki
so
mamy.
happy to
Myślę, że
have
czeka nas
such
owocne
an
2
outstanding
godziny
team of panelists. I think that's
dyskusji.
the upcoming 2 hours is going to
zacząć
be a
od
feast when it comes to
doktora
exchanging
Mahmouda Faraga, ponieważ
food for thought.
Mahmoud
And let me start by
specjalnie dla
giving the
nas
floor to
przygotował dzisiaj
Mahmoud.
prezentację,
You've prepared a
w której
presentation
krótko
for this
omówi
panel to briefly
dobre
discuss
praktyki
good
w
practices
zakresie
and
współpracy z obywatelami
lessons learned when
i
it comes to
angażowania ich
working with
do
citizens
monitoringu
and
zamówień
engaging them
publicznych,
to
które
monitor
wynikają
public
właśnie
procurement
z
procedures.
różnych paktów uczciwości
You will be
prowadzonych w Europie. Mahmoud
presenting
ma takie
your
spojrzenie
conclusions
z
from a
lotu
variety of integrity
ptaka
pacts carried out
na
in Europe. You
to, co
will give
działo
us
się
a
we
bird's
wszystkich
eye
11
view
krajach,
on what's
które
happening
brały
in
udział w
11
pilotażu, więc na pewno
member
wyłuska dla nas
states that participated in the pilot program. So
najciekawsze
I'm sure this
kąski
is
i
going to
też
be the creme de la creme,
jest
the
w stanie
most
podzielić się
interesting
takimi
elements, and
ogólnymi wnioskami
you will be
na
able
temat
to
tego,
share some
czy
general
wśród tych
conclusions with
obywateli
us as
naprawdę
well.
łatwo jest
Is it
zainteresować tematem
easy
zamówień
to
publicznych,
make
który nie zawsze
people
jest
interested
jakby
in
łatwo
public
zrozumiały.
procurement? Well,
A
that's not
jeżeli
so easily understandable for everybody, is it?
można
And
da się to robić,
if
to
it is
jaka jest
doable, if
najlepsza do
it's
tego
feasible,
metoda?
what
Jaka
would be
droga
the
prowadzi
best
do
way to
tego,
do
żeby
it?
właśnie
What's the
tych
best
obywateli trochę
route to
zaktywizować i
engaging
skłonić do tego, żeby też
citizens,
przyglądali się sami z siebie, jak są
making them
wydawane
more
publiczne
willing
pieniądze w ramach
to look at
realizacji
the
inwestycji
spending of public
publicznych. Także
funds?
Mahmoud, zapraszam Cię serdecznie do
Mahmoud, the
prezentacji
floor is
i
yours.
oddaję Ci głos.
And
Też to
now
jest prośba do
over
wszystkich
to you. The
panelistów
mic is yours as well.
o takie
And a
maksymalnie
quick ask to all the
10-minutowe
panelists,
odpowiedzi,
try
żebyśmy
to
mogli mieć czas właśnie na 2 rundy
be
pytań i
disciplined
jeszcze
in
pytania
terms of
od
time.
osób,
I
które
would
nas
like you
oglądają.
to
Mahmoud,
talk for
zapraszam
not
Cię.
more than 10 minutes. So Mahmoud, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Marcin, for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and thanks for promoting me to an associate professor at the University of Zurich. My official title is a postdoctoral fellow, but I'm aspiring to be a professor, so it's a nice, that's nice from you. I'm going to start today by saying that citizen engagement in public contracting is different than citizen engagement in other activities. So, for example, the whole agenda of social accountability that is promoted by the World Bank, it has a less focus on public contracting and more focus on the evaluation of public services that people are benefiting from, which is much more easier. So the short answer to your question, Marcin, is that citizen engagement in public contracting is difficult, but it is very promising and it is doable. And we are going to discuss today how this can be doable. I'm going to start in my next slide by arguing that there are 4 key success factors that we can distill from the experience of the many different partners as part of the Integrity Pact's Europe project that was coordinated by Transparency International and run by partners all over Europe. And my first success factor in the next slide is the project itself. So if we have the luxury to choose a project, this project has to have 3 main traits or characteristics. The first one is value. So people are more interested and are more willing to be engaged in monitoring public contracting when it concerns a project that is perceived to be valuable by them. It's not about our perception whether this is valuable or not, but it's about the perception of people. And value can mean different things. So, for example, in Italy, the project that was monitored by ActionAid Italy was the renovation of an archaeological site in Sybaris, and for the people there was a clear socio-economic value in terms of renovating this site because it would generate more tourism and get more jobs into the area. So I think thinking from the perspective of people and putting ourselves in the shoes and understanding what is perceived to be value, and in the process also asking them if this is perceived to be valuable. So when it's not perceived to be valuable, citizens tend to disengage a bit. And in Slovenia, for example, there was a very interesting project that we could all agree that it is valuable, but this wasn't perceived to be as valuable by citizens. And this was actually improving the energy system, energy reservation system of 2 hospitals in Slovenia. And for us, this is very important. This can lead to reducing emissions. This can lead to reducing expenses. But for people, this wasn't very perceived to be having direct value to them. And that's why this was one of the reasons that there wasn't a lot of engagement with this project. The second point here, which is also important, is it is very difficult to engage citizens if there is high opposition on their side to the project itself. So if people oppose the project, it doesn't make sense to actually engage them, right? And this was very clear from the experience of our partners in Latvia, who were monitoring the Riga tram project, the extension of a Riga tram project. And for them, because the Riga tram line was going through a historical graveyard, a group of citizens who were called the Graveyard Friends were actually against this project from the very start, and they were perceived, and it was very difficult for them to be engaged in a project that they are actually against it. So I think ensuring that the project that we will be monitoring is endorsed rather than opposed by citizens is very important. Going to the third point, which is visibility. Citizens are more interested to monitor and to be engaged in something that they can see and can actually monitor the progress over time. This is more applicable for projects that are projects and not service contracts, right? So in the project there were a number of service contracts that, for example, establishing like what was the case in Czech Republic, for example, establishing a national system in order to be able to manage EU funding. This is very interesting, but it has a system. It's an IT system. It's really difficult to monitor that. At the end, you have a final project that you will see at the end. So there's no clear process where people can actually see and monitor and be engaged. So I would say that the value, opposition, and visibility are three important considerations that we need to take to account if we want people to be engaged in the project. Moving to in the next slide, moving to the next point, which is no citizens, no engagement, right? So if we want to engage citizens, it doesn't make sense to have engagement if we don't have citizens. But the question is, how can we get citizens to be engaged? And we can, from the experience of different partners, we can actually say there are 5 main important building blocks that can enable citizen engagement in public contracting, and one of it is in information. From the interaction of different partners with citizens, there was clear indication that people are not very aware how public contracting is essential to their own lives. They don't know that public contracting is a process that manages how the airports that they use when they travel, the train stations, and the public transport systems that they use when they go to work every day, the roads that they use when they go to buy their stuff, right? The hospitals and schools that they use. So public contracting affects all aspects of our lives, and it's important for people to understand that engaging is important because this is an important process, important public process. So many of our partners have actually tried to do that, to overcome this by providing information in terms of doing information sessions, doing online ads, doing offline sessions, doing town hall meetings with citizens. So there is a lot of ways to be able to facilitate passing on information to people about how public contracting can affect their own lives. including the project that they are supposed to monitor. And second point is capacity. People are not going to be engaged if they don't have enough capacity, right? And capacity is about knowledge and skills. Public contracting is a very difficult difficult process, right? So it includes a lot of paperwork, includes a lot of legal documents. And if we want to include citizens, we want to ensure that they have the capacity. And it's about also deciding to what extent do we want them to be engaged, right? So capacity is at the end limited, right? So if we, in our partners in Italy, for example, they have designed very ambitious and interesting capacity building programs to get people to understand what is public contracting, what is anti-corruption, what is the anti-corruption law, um, how the public contracting process is supposed to be going according to the law, how they can actually review tender documents. So it's a long process, and it needs discussion with people, how we can make this how we can make this process easy, and to what extent they want to be engaged in the process. Expecting that citizens will be able to monitor a public contracting process on their own, it's a bit over ambitious, I would say. The three there are also 3 points that are somehow connected to each other. One of them is distrust, the second is empathy, and the third one is collective action. So people usually, and the data from the global corruption barometer over the years that has been telling that people have distrust in public authorities, and including in public contracting itself, in the process itself. So they don't, and this leads to people also feeling that whatever they do, if they're engaged or not, this is not going to change anything. So I think there is a role here for the Integrity Pact to play, to show that Integrity Pact actually gives you the right and gives you access to documents in order to review documents that in some cases are not accessible under the access to information law. And at the same time, Integrity Pacts, because it's a three-way process between citizens and also civil society and civil society organizations who are doing the monitoring, vis-a-vis the bidders and public authorities. I think there is a good way where we can build trust via doing um, uh, by having interaction between citizens on one hand, and between the public authorities and bidders on the other hand. I think it is through this dialogue, and this is not a one-shot meeting, right? This is a process of dialogue between citizens and public authorities, through which we can build and enhance trust. And this was very clearly done with our partners in Italy, Action Aid, that has been doing these types of collective, these types of dialogue between citizens and public authorities over time, and slowly they could build build trust over time. I would say we don't have um, uh, extensive evidence, but we have anecdotal evidence that shows that people are more trustful now when they are engaged and they have an insider view of the process itself. Going to my next slide, and my third success factor, which is look in the mirror, right? So in this slide, you can so can you please move to the next slide? Yeah, look in the mirrors, right? And this is about us as civil society, right? So the other points were about citizens and the project, but this is about us. If we want to engage citizens, we want to ensure that we have know-how, right? So citizen engagement is not organizing a meeting to tell people how this can be done. Citizen engagement is a process, and it requires a certain knowledge about how this can be done to different people in different contexts, and we have to be from the very beginning of the project to invest in that, to make sure that we have the budget to hire the right people. We have also local contexts that can facilitate our access to the community. So one example from Hungary is that via local contacts, they were able to reach out to local communities and organize activities on the ground, and which wouldn't have actually been possible without these local contacts. So it's always important to take the time to build these local contexts, to make sure that we have know-how, and at the same time to make sure that we have the budget to be able to organize these activities. In some of our partners who didn't budget for that actually found it harder towards the end of the project to be able to take activities, to undertake activities, because this wasn't actually originally budgeted. So in order to make sure that I don't exceed the 10 minutes, so I'm going to go to my last success factor in the next slide, which is fix the broken bridge, right? We need to also take into consideration that public authorities, citizen engagement is dependent also on building incentives for public authorities in order to allow and to embrace citizen engagement. This is not in the DNA of many public authorities, right? To allow citizens to look to have a look and to review what they are doing. They think that this is part of the job, and they know the job, and engaging citizens sometimes is difficult. So I think we need to think creatively about how to have some incentives that would actually lead to public authorities being more open for citizen engagement. This can take the form of making sure that citizens would sign in confidential statements saying that this information that they are reviewing as part of the project is not going to be to go beyond the project itself. This can also thinking about how we can overcome the legal obstacles to citizen engagement, right? And how to overcome also invested interest. In some cases, it is not. There might be interests that are invested interests on the part of local politicians, for example, who can be anti-citizen engagement. So thinking about that and thinking how we can work with them to overcome their fears, their mistrust. This can help with making citizen engagement work in the process, in the context of public contracting. This is a process. It's a cultural change, I would say, but it requires time and effort. But I would say it is worth it. So I'll stop here. My 10 minutes are up, and I look forward to continuing our discussion and continuing my slides in the second part of the panel.
Bardzo dziękuję, Mahmoud.
Thank you
Ja się
so much.
podpisuję pod twoimi słowami, że
I can only
angażowanie
echo your
obywateli w
words,
tak
engaging
niedostępne obszary
citizens
czasami
in areas that
działalności władz
are
publicznych, jak
barely
zamówienia publiczne, to jest proces,
accessible
który
to
nie
them,
może być jakby zakończony
so
sukcesem po
hard to
jednej próbie,
get
tylko
into
jednak
as public
jest to
procurement
proces,
is
który
indeed
właśnie
a
wymaga czasu, żeby
challenge.
to
It's a
zaufanie
process that requires time.
zbudować. Też to
It
organizacje,
requires a
które się
solid
w tym
foundation
monitoringu
of
angażują. My
trust.
sami
Also
jesteśmy
trust
najlepszym
towards
tego
organizations
przykładem.
that
Mówię
do
Fundacja
monitoring.
Batorego, która
We, the
monitorowała
Batory Foundation, are the best
projekt
example of
kolejowy w
that.
Polsce, bo
We supervise the
zaczynaliśmy od
railroad
spotkania
project in
z lokalnymi
Poland.
mieszkańcami, które musieliśmy
Initially,
odwołać,
we
bo
had a
nikt się nie
meeting
zgłosił, na
with
drugie było 5 osób.
local
Na trzecie
inhabitants
20,
that we had
a
to
potem na
cancel because
ostatnim już
nobody wanted to
był naprawdę
attend.
frekwencja
The
była
next
dosyć
attempt was 5 people, then we had 20
duża
people,
i
and at the
zainteresowanie
very last
pytania
meeting
też
we had a
wiele.
lot of
Więc
people,
tutaj
huge
to
interest, many
pokazuje, że
questions.
to jest coś, nad tym trzeba cały czas pracować i
This shows us that what
niektóre
we
próby
do
oczywiście mogą
requires
się
continuous
nie powieść, ale
effort.
mimo wszystko nie warto się zrażać, bo
Sometimes you may
na sam
fail,
koniec,
however,
jeżeli
you cannot
jesteśmy
get
widoczni jako ten
discouraged.
obserwator społeczny,
At the end
jeżeli
of the
ludzie
day,
nam
if
ufają,
you're
to
visible as a social
jak też
observer, if
pokazał
people
nasz
trust
przykład,
you,
zwracają się do nas z różnymi problemami i
They know they can come to you if they have problems. This is our lesson learned from our project. This is also the crux of Integrity Pact. It has to respond to real needs of local communities, communities that are directly impacted by the investments that we are monitoring. Thank you very much. Now, I would like to hand over to Irina. Could you share with us the Romanian experience? I know that you also made attempts to engage with stakeholders of your investments that you were monitoring. In your case, these were students of local schools, teachers, parents of these students, but you also had a campaign for disseminating the mechanism of whistleblowing in your project. I'm sure you have extensive experience and many lessons learned from your activities. I know that the times were not easy. This was a pandemic. Therefore, I will be also interested in that particular aspect. The pandemic is not yet over. We should distance ourselves from others. Are close relations, building close ties with citizens doable in such a difficult time? Can we act together, even though we can only meet online, like we are meeting today, for instance? So, Irina, over to you. Try to keep it to 10 minutes, please.
Thank you very much for the introduction and can you hear me? Okay. Thank you for the introduction and the questions. Mahmoud and you already presented some positive factors and good practices on what can be done to support citizens' engagement in monitoring public procurement. The Romanian story I have, it's full of challenges, and there are lessons that we learned, and we will definitely do something different in the future based on the experience that we had. I need to present briefly what we are actually monitoring in terms of public procurement that are part of the Integrity Pacts that we monitor, because the challenge starts, as Mahmoud said, with the type of project that we are monitoring. We monitor two types of projects. The first one, it's the land registration in Romania. Romania has a problem related to the coverage of cadastre and land registration in official registers. So the first project that we monitor, it's a very large set of public procurements for land registration in Romanian villages. One of the most important challenges we had is that at the beginning of starting of the procurement process, we didn't know the villages where the land registration will be done. This is actually established throughout the procurement process itself. So it was impossible for us to identify the local communities that are directly influenced by the public procurement before having the process of tendering and the wording of the contract ended. And this made us put us in the position that we only could do public engagement with regard to monitoring how the public procurement is implemented, not to in regard to how the public procurement process it's done until the awarding of the contract. For that part of the project or the tendering and the wording part of the program, what we have done was to try to involve as much as possible non-governmental organizations and professional organizations that are interested in the process of land registration, starting with the organization of villages in Romania, that it's an organization of mayors that are very interested in having the project implemented in their villages. Organizations of public procurement specialists, organizations of engineers that work in land registration, and so on. And we engage them through consultations and meetings on how the project and the public procurement should be organized. And based on these meetings, we formulated recommendations for the Cadastre and Land Registration Agency, that it's the public contractor that we monitor, in order to improve how the contracting was done. Afterwards, after the awarding of the contract, in the first villages where the land registration was done, we did an information campaign in order to inform citizens on their rights related to the implementation of the contract. The very important challenge in that case was that we speak about pretty small villages with disadvantaged communities. So the lack of capacity, the apathy, the lack of trust in public authorities was extremely high. We encouraged people to get in touch with us several times in order to make them report any type of misconducting that they see in the land registration. We also encourage them to get directly in touch with the land registration and cadastre agency, that it's the contract authority supervising how the contracts are implemented. As the result of this, we got the land registration agency got many reports and suggestions on how things can be done better from citizens. And based on that, this the cadastre agency took some measures in order to improve how they monitor the implementation of the contracts. The other type of contract that we are monitoring has other type of challenges. We are monitoring IT projects for digitalization of public services in Romania, and we have been involved in the monitoring of two contracts of this type. The first is the digitalization of cultural resources. Based on that, the Minister of Culture in Romania will organize digital expositions available on a platform that it's called culturalia.ro. And the other type of contract, or the other contract that we are monitoring in this type of digitalization of public services, is the digitalization of the school catalog or school databases. The aim of this project is to put all data related to school performance and school attendance of students on an online format that will be available for students, for their parents, for the authorities that are doing public policies in education in order to help them make better decisions. The big challenge with the IT projects is that although they are extremely interested and valorized by the society in Romania, they are not visible until they generate a final result. And because they are not visible, and because the entire process of developing a platform and digitalizing data that are now in an analogic form, it's long and not interesting for the public. We only had the option to involve the public in this process at the beginning. And what we did is that For the electronic catalog for schools, we reach out to the students' organizations in Romania, the parents' organizations in Romania, and the teachers' trade unions. And we organized meetings and debates with them on how they see best organized and put in practice this idea of having an electronic catalog. The same for the community in the cultural field. So we reach out and met and organized debates with different stakeholders in culture, with unions of different creators, with people interested in the culture in different fields or subfields in culture, on how they would like to and think that it's appropriate to organize these electronic digital expositions. And we took all this engagement from stakeholders that are affected and interested in the result of the procurements finally, and put them on the table of the contracting authorities. We compared how stakeholders view the relevance and the end result of the project to how the contracting authorities project them and planned to have them. And out of this, some minor changes came out, and it's minor because, on the other hand, we worked with the Ministry of Culture and Ministry of Education, and they already knew pretty much well what the stakeholders are expecting from them. So I think our involvement and the citizens and stakeholders involvement that we have been capable to do was to ensure that there is a trust between the stakeholders and the contracting authorities, that the contracting authorities are doing the thing that the stakeholders it's expecting for them. And from this point of view, we contributed to building trust. On the other hand, huge challenges came with the fact that all the projects that we are monitoring are delayed because of many complicated and technical issues. And the trust that we have been able to build at the beginning because of the consultations and involvement, it's lost because of the technical, hard to explain and sometimes hard to understand delays. They are in many cases justified, and we think as external independent monitors that they are not a problem in the process from the point of view of the integrity of the process. There is no corruption there, and the public interest is actually followed when prolonging a process in order to obtain a better result at the end. But the trust of the communities and the stakeholders in how things are organized when they are delayed in implementation, it's inevitably lost. And I need to say that we didn't find the solution to rebuild the trust that we achieved at the beginning of the project. And I'm very sad with that. I know that we had some good results at the end, but we have not been able to sustain them. And from this, I think there are two lessons learned that I will take with me for future integrity pacts. The first is that we have been experts in integrity and public procurement, and it was a great process of monitoring public procurement. In order to do better citizens engagement, I think in the process we need to involve more organizations, NGOs or civil society organizations that are very close to the subject, the object of the procurement. In the case of digitalization of cultural resources, cultural organizations, in the case of the e-catalog for Romanian schools, students organizations, in the case of land registration, local organizations working to do community development in small villages, in our case in Romania. I think that taking into the process local, small, but very specialized organizations that will understand better both the technical processes, but also how citizens or stakeholders interested in that area can be mobilized would be a great addition to how integrity pacts are designed at this moment. The second thing is that what Mahmoud already said, we need a process to translate the very technical things from the public procurement process into something that it's much more citizens and stakeholders friendly beyond the community that it's dealing with public procurement. And this is a process that I think together in Europe, different partners, we thought and put together. We have now a game, a board game that can be played in order to understand better how the public procurement process is working and so on. So this translation process was something that we learned in the last year, and we can, I think, use better in future. Thank you very much for your attention.
Dziękuję, Irina. Troszkę
Thank you, Irina.
Nie szkodzi, ponieważ bardzo ciekawe wnioski przedstawiłeś.
It was indeed a very interesting presentation about the conclusion of your projects.
Myślę, że teraz trochę ten wątek społeczności lokalnych i to, co
focus on the notion of local communities and the subject that you mentioned, working with local organizations that can help us build trust, establish contacts with local people that we want to engage. I think that's something that worked out in the Polish project as well. We had contact with different communities. Let's face it, one of them was the community of the Poraj commune. We went there in September, and I must say we were deeply impressed of how vivid the community life is. There were so many topics that we could discuss, meetings that were open to everybody interested. Public investments are discussed. There are meetings devoted to them, organized by Madam Mayor. I think this is a very good area to make people interested in Integrity Pact. Therefore, my question to you, madam, could you share with us your experience? Would you say that interest in the very public tender or public procurement, irrespective whether that's project that is only pursued in one commune or in more communes, would you say it's something that comes naturally? Is it high? Or perhaps it's the commune that should address its citizens and provide information proactively. Could you give us your perspective? You're a member of local authorities. Could you give us your take when it comes to working closely with citizens and ensuring that there are no irregularities when it comes to public investments, no problems, no difficulties? Over to you, Madam. Katarzyna Kaźmierczak is with us.
Dzień dobry raz jeszcze, witam wszystkich panelistów. Dziękuję serdecznie za zaproszenie Fundacji Batorego, panu Marcinowi Waszakowi, bo moja obecność na tej telekonferencji jest w zasadzie przypadkowa, wyniknęła z faktu, że gmina Poraj stała się w cudzysłowie beneficjentem problemu, jaki pojawił się w trakcie realizacji inwestycji Polskiej Kolei Państwowych PLK na odcinku Częstochowa-Zawiercie. Ja chciałabym powiedzieć o czymś, czego dotknęłam w tej swojej niedługiej karierze samorządowca jako włodarza, czyli kontroli społecznej. Nie powiem niczego nowego, jeżeli powiem, że ta kontrola dzieli się na taką niezorganizowaną i zorganizowaną, albo może odwrotnie, zorganizowaną i niezorganizowaną. Na poziomie samorządu tę kontrolę zorganizowaną sprawują przede wszystkim authorities,
The controlled part of it is done mostly by the councillors of the communal council.
Nie wynika, żeby kiedykolwiek zaangażowały się w to
Based on my experience, I never had a situation when organizations would be engaged in that. The Batory Foundation is an exception, and I will return to that later on.
Jeśli chodzi o kontrolę niezorganizowaną,
When it
czyli taką,
comes
powiedzmy sobie,
to
spontaniczną,
spontaneous forms of activities pursued by groups of citizens or individual citizens, it's rooted in the official institution of complaints that each citizen can lodge. In practice, however, social control has a variety of faces. It will not be a surprise for you if I say that social control is done usually via social media. I'll return to that in a second. I would like to start by the operations of our council, of what we do in terms of communal investments. This is our everyday bread. Our councillors are interested in what is happening, what will be pursued, investments that will be done, etc., etc. During my 3 years of tenure as a mayor in Poraj, we didn't have that many investments, frankly speaking. However, councillors are also taking a very close look at external investments. And it's a kind of I'm checking your bluff thing. In other words, to what extent is the mayor, to what extent are the authorities interested in investments? Are they up to date when it comes to the timeline of works, any irregularities, shortcomings that might occur? Importantly, in the last 3 years, Poraj commune was a huge construction site done by under 3 huge projects, reconstruction of the provincial road that runs through 3 localities belonging to our commune. The second one was modernization of district road, and thirdly, the investment that you mentioned, the railroad investment, modernization of railroad line from Częstochowa to Zawiercie. That meant temporary closures of roads, complications when it comes to getting to specific localities, people having problem to get to their houses, etc. And, well, naturally, we were in close contact with the contractors and companies, but the contacts intensified, simply, if I can say it so bluntly. I simply had to be very up to speed, very much up to speed. This non-formalized social control that I mentioned that starts in social media was precisely what we experienced. It mostly concerned the third investment that I mentioned, so the railroad one. And indeed, for some time I've been observing that activity level in social media is not only about criticism or, I would say, hate. It's become commonplace in many areas, but there is a light in the tunnel. There is some social care, if I could call it that way, and that was precisely the case with this investment carried out by the Polish railroad company, PKP, railroad section Częstochowa to Zawiercie. Citizens were worried with the pace of work, some small damages and failures that were a side effect of the works being carried out. For instance, the fact that one cable was damaged. However, people were also concerned with the fact that the project might not be completed in time on the right level, especially when it came to underground passages in 2 localities, Poraj and Żarki Letnisko.
I teraz powiem tak, skorelowanie wpisów internetowych z indywidualnym zaangażowaniem radnych,
engagement of councillors, my personal engagement, which is all too obvious, coincided
z działaniami Fundacji Batorego,
with the operations of Batory Foundation, testing the Integrity Pact, and our investment, so important to us, was the testing field, which was a sort of consolation for us. We knew that we are not alone, that there is somebody else looking through the topic. The meeting that Marcin mentioned, if my memory doesn't fail me, took place on the 16th of September at our local train station. For me, that was a meeting of paramount importance. It showed to the citizens that there is some agency in what they're doing, that they are not left alone. Theoretically, one might say, it's not your investment, why care about it?
Takie przekonanie, że aktywnie spełniać mandat radnego i że to tak naprawdę jest
and my fellow councillors felt that we need to be active in our roles.
Ja nie wiem do końca, czy my jesteśmy w stanie wypracować taki model,
on the whole, however, I'm not so sure whether we are able to work out a model or a standard for external social control, a level of civic engagement. I have been a teacher of history for over 2 decades. I taught history, but also political and social studies for teenagers, and I was always trying to emphasize to my fellow students what civic engagement is, what civic attitude is, what citizenship means. I'm not sure whether that's working out in Poland. We as representatives of local authorities are still struggling with it. On the one hand, I agree with what Mahmoud said. It's not in the DNA of many local authorities. Engaging people in social control and civic control is not something that we do automatically. That's why I'm particularly interested in the incentives for local authorities to make sure that they take good care of civic attitudes, of civic engagement in their local communities. In Poland, we as local authorities, we are under permanent external control. Let's not forget about it. Especially recently, we've had a number of supervision and controls. They are done ad hoc. They come as a surprise. Civic monitoring for us is a form of additional puzzle, but based on what I saw when it comes to the activities of Batory Foundation and based on what I read about the Integrity Pact, I know that even though the process is long-lasting, however, when it comes to building civic engagement, it is a condition sine qua non. I'm not sure whether I presented my experience from exactly the angle that you were asking me about, but to return to what the first speaker said today, what is visible from a bird's eye perspective can be seen by me from the position of a frog. And I hope I have not exceeded my time limit of 10 minutes. No, not at all. Your spot on when it comes to timing, and also the topics that you mentioned in your presentation were particularly important. It will not come as a secret to you. We are among like-minded people, birds of a feather stick together, as they say, so an external perspective is always most welcome. You have jumped into the world of the Integrity Pact for a second, and you're also valuable feedback for us on how to develop, how to improve the Integrity Pact, and whether it's really useful, for instance, for local authorities or local councillors. So once again, thank you very much, madam. Now, let me hand over to Rafael and well, to refer to what was said by your full speaker, Madam Kaźmierczak. She was talking about the need of social control. I assume that after the pilot project of Integrity Pact that is coming to its end right now, we can expect that certain standards will be worked out and implemented into the law. I hope for some initiative of the European Commission, but also on the side of member states. I hope that member states will take into consideration implementation of certain elements of social monitoring into public procurement projects that are of particular importance. Such standards should be included in the law or should take the form of in guidelines that might be an incentive for local authorities to engage in that, to develop this engagement, as Madam Kaźmierczak mentioned. Rafael, do you see any chance of such regulations being implemented? Are they needed? When it comes to the Polish Pact, this was based on goodwill of our partners. The fact that we were able to participate in the operations of the tender committee, this was just goodwill of our partners. It was never included in the law. We know that in the Romanian case, it was much more strict. If something is not in the law, it is not admissible. The Integrity Pact was not present in official government documents, which was a barrier against its implementation, against developing contacts with civic society. What can you promise to yourself after this pilot project? Is there a real chance that Integrity Pact will become a regular mechanism of protecting public funds against abuse and misappropriation in member states?
Great. Well, thank you very much for the invitation, and it's been great hearing from all of you all these learnings, and thank you, Marcin, for this very provocative question on the possibility of turning integrity pacts or other forms of civic engagement and monitoring of public contracting into the law, into regulation. And if I have to be very straightforward and direct, I think that we have still a very long way to get to that point. And this for me is also a little bit perplexing and challenging, considering that in the European Union, the size of public contracting is extremely high. It can reach to 12 to 15% overall of the EU GDP. And in some of the EU member states, the size of public contracting actually reaches up to 20%, 17%. And that is a lot of money, a lot of resources. And even though that it is true, as Mayor Katarzyna was mentioning, that there are many structures and mechanisms to supervise public contracting, the truth is that these mechanisms are right now constrained to or under control only from government authorities. And this is the reason why I think it is still uncertain, and we have a long path to go. Oversight and monitoring, as currently, they are only seen as a government prerogative. And what I mean by this is that authorities are the ones who decide what, who, and how to monitor rather than taxpayers and citizens. Something that we have observed right now, after being analyzing the experience of the 18 APs, monitoring 46 public contracting procedures, is that there is still a lot to do, a lot of convincing. We still need to create the case to set the foundations to have more decentralized and open oversight of public contracting. We still have this very long way to bring citizens into this process, and also to convince authorities and let them, and I mean, how to say it in a polite way. We need to convince authorities and also the leaders of government, those that are in power, that the prerogative or the decision to monitor public contracting has to come from citizens and taxpayers as well. It should not only be a decision or a prerogative from the governments themselves. And for doing that, we still need to go a long path and to turn this public demand into something that is at the top of the public agenda. The communities that are affected by these projects must have a possibility, they must have a say on to decide how to enhance controls and monitoring of the projects that will be affecting their own lives, the public services that they received. So I think that the Integrity Pact's EU project has been helpful to understand where are we standing and what are the challenges that we are facing ahead. I think there are two different paths that definitely we can follow. One is exploring the EU regulation, and for that we need to we have had a great partner with the European Commission, but we still need to engage with other authorities within the European scope. We need to talk more to the European Parliament, to those representative of the different member states in the Parliament. We need to talk to other different authorities, the Council, the Supreme auditing institution of the European Union. We need to talk to those who are doing control and oversight, and we need to convince them and see what are the different paths that we have to make citizen monitoring and integrity pacts a more regular practice across the European Union. We have the European semester that happens on a regular basis, and we need to identify who are the authorities that are carrying out this process and see how do they also bring or suggest to the member states that they incorporate these kind of mechanisms into the recommendations. The common provisions regulation, which are the mechanisms that regulate how the European funds are spent, should also contemplate this kind of mechanism. So far, even though they have been recently adjusted, they do not consider or contemplate any form of direct citizen monitoring or engagement. For the last, we could say 5 years, we have seen that there has been a great push from the European authorities to enhance and strengthen oversight and control. And for that, we have the new European public prosecutor, and they have also improved the tools and the resources that have authorities such as Olaf, and they have focused very much on strengthening their own capacities and enlarging the oversight mechanisms that are formal and that are led by government, but they have left aside citizens and civil society. And considering the size of public contracting in the European Union, I think it would be extremely helpful to broaden the scope and allow citizens and civil society organizations to become a more regular actor in the monitoring of these public contracts. And then I would say that in the national level, there is also as well a great scope of possibilities. And for that, we need to do more and more convincing of the local authorities, both local and national authorities in all member states, to create these paths and to explore where Integrity Pacts can be embedded. Integrity Pacts or also any other form of civic monitoring. Something that we have observed through the Integrity Pacts EU project is that the Integrity Pact works way better when it is embedded in the projects that have some strategic value for citizens or for the country. So when I have been reviewing the different Integrity Pacts, I have found that those that were linked to, for example, public services such as transportation, or as Irina was mentioning, like to a service that is very important, like land registration, having your ownership rights well defined. Those are the ones who have taken more or that have had more impact and that have had more traction. So we also need to keep finding those projects that are in need of additional oversight and monitoring, and make the case to have an Integrity Pact and citizens involved in monitoring these projects and making sure that they are executed from planning to implementation with robust oversight in order to prevent corruption, to maximize competition, and to make sure that they are in the end in line with the common interest. And I think that it will be only if we keep doing Integrity Pacts recurrently, if we keep making the case to have them embedded where they matter, that in the long term we're gonna be able to have them embedded into the law or into national or EU regulation. It is about making sure that this practice becomes something more regular, and that later it can be recognized and acknowledged as a formal mechanism that have to continue and remain as part of the architecture of regulation and controls that we have. I think that the Mayor Katarzyna makes a very good point by saying that sometimes it feels that it's more of a burden, that governments are not very convinced. But the reason why we still have that perception when we say like we need to add more monitoring probably is because we still need to do more public communication and public convincing of the value of bringing citizens into the equation. Yes, it is possible. There is a possibility that the project might actually be a little bit slower when you are bringing citizens into the equation, but also you're going to have more possibilities to uncover things that could be going wrong and correct it in time before it is too late. So I think that the Integrity Pact EU project has shown us many of the different challenges, but also many of the benefits that can be observed when you bring citizens and civil society organizations into the monitoring and into the equation. So I wish I could be more optimistic about seeing the Integrity Pact and other mechanisms embedded faster in the regulation, but I think we still have to do a lot of convincing and a lot of work to show the value and keep insisting and finding those politicians, those governments that are willing to do the things right, that they are willing to try a more decentralized and open way of control with citizens, and showcase how the contribution of citizens can improve the outcome of public contracting projects.
Dziękuję Ci, Rafa. Absolutnie się z Tobą
Thank
zgadzam,
you,
że
Rafa. I couldn't
ma
agree
sens
more.
i my jako
Pressure makes
zaangażowani
sense
w ten pilotaż paktu uczciwości też
as
musimy dawać świadectwo
organizations
tego, że
engaged in the
pilotaż
Integrity
faktycznie
Pact, we
przynieść
have to
dobre
be a role model.
owoce, jeśli chodzi
We have to
właśnie
show
na
people
różnych polach,
that
na
the
polu
pact
zaangażowania
brings
obywateli,
good
na polu
fruit in
przepływu
various
informacji, na polu
levels.
właśnie
Information flow, social engagement,
i
decreasing the
wtedy
risk of
może
irregularities,
faktycznie
etc.
przynieść też rezultaty w postaci
This will definitely bring
zmian prawa,
tangible
na które wydaje mi się, wszyscy tutaj
effects. For
czekamy.
instance, changes of the legal
I
framework.
ostatnim
That's
naszym
something that we are all
mówcą w tej
waiting
części
currently.
będzie Grzegorz
Last but
Makowski,
not least, Grzegorz Makowski,
który no, Zadając pytanie Grzegorzowi, chciałbym tutaj się odwołać oczywiście do naszego wspólnego doświadczenia.
Asking my questions, I would like to refer to our joint experience related to the Integrity Pact, specifically our contact with representatives of local governments and authority. Towards the very end of the project, we had a chance to talk to these people, and we concluded that there is a certain level of expectations on the side of local council members, local officials, to have the Integrity Pact present on the local level. Just to give you an example, prices for picking up waste for detached and semi-detached houses. And the question arose, can Integrity Pact help here? Would it be a way to encourage more companies to participate in the tender? Perhaps the price could be lowered if there's social control, ensuring that there is no wasting of money. For us, it's a clear signal. We can and we should test the Integrity Pact at the local level. Grzegorz, do you also see it under the formula that we tested? In other words, the red tape barriers that Madam Kaźmierczak mentioned should stimulate us to look for a simpler formula of integrity pacts for local investments. Over to you. Thank you. Before I answer your question, let me say that I'll give my own perspective. I hope that this will be a word of encouragement for other panelists to reflect upon my words. Hence, let me start by amplifying and underscoring certain topics that were mentioned by my four speakers. First of all, once again, let me thank you, Madam Mayor, for honoring us with your presence. I'm really far away from stating that you're here accidentally. Well, the only coincidence that I can think of is that we met only on the last mile of our pilot project. But now, after what you've said, I think that your presence on such a panel is no coincidence at all. It's only 50 kilometers stretch of the railroad line that we monitored. If we had more mayors like you, more councillors like the ones from your communal council that really got engaged heavily in the topic, we would have a stronger element of bottom-up mobilization. I'm not saying that there was no other person on the other side. Perhaps we didn't find the right key to really get to the right people. I think it's so important for us to be able to meet at the right moments in time. I'm not only speaking of representatives of the Batory Foundation who would cover several hundred kilometers to arrive at the place where the investment was being implemented, but also in terms of engaging local authorities, citizens, local community, making sure that they supervise the expenditure of public money. This is the dimension that I would like to underscore. It would be my plea, actually, my big ask to all of you. It seems to us that what we are all missing is education, fully fledged civic communication related to public procurement procedures. Secondly, and again, I will echo the words of Mayor Kaźmierczak and Mahmoud, I think that we haven't learned it yet. We haven't learned to operate like that yet. I started dreaming that in some time Polish schools might come back to teaching students the basics of economics. Perhaps that's what we should be doing, teaching people how to manage their finances, what free market is, what does the budget of a state comprise, and so on and so forth. Perhaps we should include public procurement in that. Indeed, that is huge money. In Poland, we are talking over 200 million PLN annually that is going through the public procurement system. So we might teach people about the mechanism, make them aware of what public money is. And in that context, we might focus on public procurement. In Poland, over 40% of public procurement is implemented through local authorities. Out of the 40%, if my memory doesn't fail me, over 75%, over 3/4 are tenders on the level of communes. Can you get closer to that? It's as close as it gets to your local experience. If you want to engage people, make them interested in public procurement, I think you need to make the best use of the instruments that we have, be them pacts, activities carried out by local councillors, mayors, local organizations. Such actions should be targeted at people who are already aware of what is happening, who are adult. But, and this will be my suggestion, perhaps we should do some grassroots work. The public procurement system will not disappear from our reality in the years to come. It is here to stay for many decades. There is no better way to spend public money. If people know what public procurement system is, how it impacts their lives, the general condition will improve. Right now, the knowledge level is very low. Back when we started the project, the conditions and the needs were slightly different. We played an expert role in the past in the field of public procurement, even before the Integrity Pact was born. However, let me frankly say that when we entered the project, it wasn't that we had a 100% understanding on all sides why we are doing that. Very often, even within the foundation, we had to explain to people why is it important in the context of good governance, open governance, fighting corruption. These topics are much better rooted in the mentalities of our member. We had to somehow explain it to ourselves why public procurement matters in that broader context. What is missing, in my opinion, is a, say, human narrative about the topic. And it is of paramount importance. To come back to your question, Marcin, that you asked me, I'd like to say that in the Polish context, this was a pilot program, and let me underscore the word pilot. It was an absolute pilot program. Irina, perhaps you will correct me if I'm wrong. In Romania, there were some experiments. I'm sure there had been some in Hungary, in Italy before. The pilot project is also being carried out there. There were some attempts in Bulgaria, some initial experience related to this tool. In Poland, this is an absolute novum. We never managed to do it, even though a long time ago there were some attempts to introduce that tool. If the tool was to take some real shape, if it was to be supported and implemented at a greater scale, then apart from projects which involve EU funds that might be included in Integrity Pact projects, perhaps there would be some institutions like the Ministry of Finance that would be interested in strengthening and enhancing public monitoring of public procurement. At the end of the day, however, if we are to scale it up, local authorities would be the right place to address. And if local authorities are the stakeholder, the formula that we have offered is not fully tailored made to the needs of local authorities. I'm not saying it's good for nothing. Back when we started the pact in Poland, apart from general guidelines and a general manual how to do things guidebook, there was very little information about how to organize the process, how to operate with practitioners, with lawyers, how to regulate it, should it be a contract or something else. There were many dilemmas that were solved thanks to the pilot project. Of course, they don't need to be replicated one-to-one on local level. However, they have to be simpler. No doubt about it. We already took some steps in that direction. Already at the stage of the pilot project, we were thinking about proposing a light version of the pact, so Integrity Pact Light, which would be addressed at local authorities dealing with smaller public procurement projects. Unfortunately, we didn't make it. The dynamism of events in our pilot project simply exceeded our expectations. However, at the foundation, there are other programs. The studio for local governments is a venue where we want to meet active local authorities, representatives, link them to CSOs, to NGOs, to communities, and work out together concepts that might improve the functioning of local self-governments and engage people. Frankly speaking, the idea of Integrity Pact was welcome among our befriended local government representatives. So perhaps, apart from that pilot project, the Integrity Pact Light will come into existence, perhaps under the wings of our foundation. However, I don't want to take any credit for that. The pact is an open tool. It's funded from public funds. And if there are any representatives of local governments listening to us right now, the money is up for grabs. What we've prepared is up for grabs. And you're free to take the tool and develop it locally, tailor it to your local needs. Don't wait for us, please. Much has been done. We have prepared a manual or handbook for social monitoring, describing all the practicalities. Even if you think about pure technicalities, there is some solid foundation that we've already constructed. To conclude, I had a similar attitude to other tools related to public procurement that we would develop in the past. The barometer of abuses and misappropriations in public procurement, which was a kind of generator for assessment of public procurement throughout the entire market. Such tools always made me think about local councillors. The council members would be the first group to be equipped with the knowledge and the skill to observe and monitor and oversee public procurement. Why local councillors? Well, the construct in Poland, at least, is typical Machiavellian, so the tri-division of power. Local councils, apart from passing acts of local law, they are expected to oversee the executive, and the executive is responsible for purchasing decisions, which include public procurement. I meet local councillors under other projects pursued by our foundation, and I frequently heard voices saying, oh yes, well, there are so many public procurement projects in our communes, we don't have the knowledge, we cannot get the information from administration bodies, we don't know how to monitor, how to oversee them. If councillors wanted to engage, they would be able to do the most in this respect. They are the conduit, the bridge between citizens who are not councillors and the executive on the communal level, which operates on a slightly different level. Being such a link, such a bridge, councillors could play a very important role if they learned to monitor, to oversee, use the tools, and mobilize their constituencies to scrutinize public procurement projects. In my view, it's very possible to have a light version of the Integrity Pact. The target group should be local councillors, but that doesn't mean that I'm forgetting other groups of citizens. Citizens are also CSOs, NGOs, other organizations, or people who are not affiliated with any organization, people who simply have a common denominator. For instance, they are impacted by a specific investment or purchase project. You don't necessarily need to be an association or organization. Let me come back to what was said by Mahmoud, and perhaps I will amplify it. You said that money is needed. Fair enough, I agree. In the pilot project, the situation of our foundation was really comfortable, and we had a pretty sum of money allocated for that pilot project. However, money is not everything, or money is not the primary thing. What matters is engagement. If the public procurement project is, because of its character, hard to monitor, like the one that we were working on, it was related to local infrastructure, and sometimes it was hard to get to the construction site itself, which was at times necessary. However, when there's will, when people are ready to sacrifice their time for monitoring, for oversight of this and that project, much can be achieved even without investing huge money. And when it comes to local tenders, normally these are not huge projects. Normally these are projects related to supply and services. I spoke about the barometer of the risk of abuse and misappropriation. It's, say, half dead right now, but back in the days when it was fully alive, when we were carrying out analysis related to the risk of abuse and misappropriation under various tenders implemented in Poland, what we saw is that it's not the biggest infrastructural projects that are most susceptible to corruption, but small projects, supply of, say, office materials, stationery. Big money can leak in such small drops. Initially, you might say that it's a dripping stream here and there, but if you add those tiny projects on the scale of the entire country, then the risk magnifies. And monitoring small projects is not so absorbing, and perhaps it can spark engagement and can have an educational role. To conclude, let me ask a question to Rafael. Rafa, you come from Mexico. From what I know, in Mexico, it was possible to integrate integrity pacts into the law. From what I know, and please correct me if I'm wrong, in Mexico, it was possible to mobilize people to monitor and oversee public procurement. Could you give us a hint, piece of advice? You might have some insider knowledge related to the pact in Mexico. How did you make it? What is the regulation? What is the practice? What does it look like? How did you embed it in the law? I hope that this question is not too much of a burden for you, but we would like to hear from you, from your personal experience. Thank you very much, Grzegorz. More and more times, fewer and fewer minutes left. We have less than 30 minutes left. So in this round, please be shorter in your interventions. I did not interrupt you before. Now I will have no other option. So please stay within the limit of 5 minutes. And I will be adding some additional questions for you. You can try to answer them briefly, but you can also refer to what you said in the first round of interventions. And again, without further ado, Rafael, I wanted to start with you. So my first question will go to you. Apart from Grzegor's question, I wanted to come back to the following question. Transparency International Secretariat presents recommendations that the social observer should be present at every stage of the project, from preparation through tendering up to selection of the contractor, implementation, and sometimes warranty procedures. I think it's justified, but at the same time very ambitious in the light of what we said today about limited capabilities of citizens when it comes to going deep into public procurement. Perhaps that's too much. Perhaps we should offer something smaller, like Grzegorz was saying, a soft version. Perhaps it will not cover the entirety of the process, but will be more effective. It will be easier to mobilize people to do that. That's my question to you. And now over to you. Stay within 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, both Marcin and Gregor, for the questions. And I think both of them are very much on point. And I will refer to the Mexican experience in a bit. But I think there has been some sort of misconception about the Integrity Pact, and understand that it has, or it must covers all different stages of public contracting. And actually what experience shows us is that sometimes more targeted and specific and shorter Integrity Pacts can have a better effect. In Mexico, how the Integrity Pact became part of the regulation was actually a more shorter but still very powerful version of it, that it's only focusing on the pre-tendering to the contracting stage. So something that we have seen here in Integrity Pact's EU project is indeed that the capacities and of the organizations and experience is also very different, as well also the availability of resources. So taking these two factors into consideration, it is important actually to consider another alternative sometimes for Integrity Pacts. The Integrity Pact, it is indeed a great tool to monitor all stages of public contracting, but it is conditioned to having the right capability, the experience, and the resources that are necessary. So when these different factors are not well aligned, sometimes it is helpful to have a more targeted and specific Integrity Pact that still allow us to have an enhanced oversight and monitoring within the limits and capacities, and do not promise or involve in stages that will be more tricky to monitor and that actually might lead to some issues with the public perceptions. For example, what would happen when the monitor does not have enough resources to monitor a project that is far from where the monitor is, or that it's too technical and requires a series of lab tests or reviews on a constant basis. Sometimes it's even better to keep the Integrity Pact limited to a very specific moment, which I would say runs from the pre-tendering to the contracting, and make sure that the contract is awarded on a competitive basis and according to the law. And then once the contract has been awarded, we can also discuss what are some of the other alternative or options that are available to monitor these a little bit more complex stages. So to wrap up, I would say that at least what we saw in Mexico when the Integrity Pact became part of the public contracting regulation was that making it more specific also allowed to broaden the scope of actors that were interested in doing it. So in Mexico, it's not only Transparency International chapter in the country who does the Integrity Pact, but also many more organizations and also different specialists that are registered in this national database of experts who can do public contracting monitoring, and that it's open to anyone that has the right credentials, both in terms of experience and independence, to do it. And they exclusively focus on monitoring the pre-tendering stage, reviewing all the documents, making sure that they are in line with the national regulation, that they are addressing the needs that are identified according to what the market can offer, and then they review that the whole process happens exclusive as it is indicated in the law, that the tender is published on time, that there is enough time to gather the clarifications or the questions from the different or the potential bidders, that the bids are received on time, that they are assessed as the tender specifies, and then that the decision of who to award the contract is in line with the whole regulation and the criteria that has been set up, and that the contract ends up being awarded to the most adequate bidder of all. And then after that, the contract is signed, then the work of the Integrity Pact or the monitor ends there, but also other opportunities for monitoring the implementation are considered. But I would also be in favor of a more, I wouldn't say softer, because I think it's still very powerful, but I would say a simplified and more targeted version of the Integrity Pact that allows to put emphasis on the most critical moments of the contracting procedure.
Thank you very much for being so disciplined with time. And now let me move on to Madam Mayor. In the light of what we said in this panel, if you were to choose one or more public procurement projects for your commune to be included in Integrity Pact, what kind of projects would that be? Rather construction works that you mentioned? You said that Poraj was a big construction site, and citizens would be very much interested in that aspect, or perhaps services, or there is no room, there is no place for such initiatives in your commune at all? Give us a brief answer, please. Well, bearing in mind the interest expressed in social media, as I mentioned, interest in what was happening in our commune, I think These would be investments. I would say that the most sensitive topics, like everywhere, include roads. In our case, it will also be sewage and water networks. In our particular case, sewage is an even more sensitive topic. My selection is based on how such investments are monitored and how controversial they are. On the very onset, it would be good to have people interested to engage from the very beginning, to become in the planning process of the investment under the umbrella of Integrity Pact. Having such oversight from the very beginning would be really good. When I was listening to all of the panelists, I realized that there is a huge advantage for local authorities stemming from it. We are building social trust anew. Very often it is missing. Our activities are looked at with suspicion. Such an approach would mean that from day one we would have some even tiny social capital, and that could be something to treat as a basis. Mistrust is omnipresent. It's not perhaps paralyzing, but it creates a huge barrier for our operations.
Przechodzę teraz do Iriny.
Now let me move on to Irina.
Tutaj chciałbym, żebyś trochę więcej powiedział, oczywiście też odnosząc
Well,
się
could
do
you
tego, co
tell
padło
us
już,
more in the context of the interventions of other panelists about the most important barriers that you had to struggle with in Romania,
zainteresować tym projektem
how to make people interested in the project,
czy opinię publiczną i
how to engage public opinion,
zwiększenia obywatelskiego zaangażowania.
How to enhance social engagement.
Na przykładzie Rumunii przydałyby się jakieś rozwiązania prawne, które
Looking from the Romanian perspective, would you say that some legal solutions could come in handy to facilitate such monitoring,
wzmocniły w roli tego obserwatora
to
społecznego?
strengthen your role of social observer? Or perhaps there are other elements that you could suggest for the future, some lessons learned from your pilot project,
byłyby jakąś taką receptą na te bariery,
something that could be
z którymi się
a
zetknęliście. Także proszę cię o
remedy for the
taką
barriers that you struggled with. Over to you.
Thank you for the question. I think there are two aspects that need to be taken into account. First, the legal remedies, I think they would help to build trust from public contractors towards civil society in the monitoring process. And from this point of view, we think in Romania that if we are careful on how we regulate integrity pacts, regulating integrity pacts can be a good idea. On the other hand, I think this will not solve challenges related to public engagement. The challenges we had related to public engagement are related to two aspects that are, I think, the most important in our case. The visibility of projects. We monitored service projects, not constructions, infrastructure projects. And we believe, looking at the experience of other partners in Europe as well, that monitoring or motivating citizens to be engaged in projects that they can see, actually it's a bit easier than involving them in projects that they cannot see. And this it's also related to how they see the progress in implementing a project. And the other thing that law will not solve, and it's particular to this period, it's the COVID pandemic. We had challenges in organizing events and meetings with local communities for the land registration project. because of the pandemic. We planned for 2020 a lot of things that we could not actually implement because of the pandemic, and this is something that it's way beyond our control, and somehow needs to be taken into account for the future, for plans B and C and so on, for how to organize citizens' engagement in this unforeseeable events. Thank you.
Bardzo dziękuję, Irina.
Thank you so much, Irina. And now I would move on to Grzegorz. And my question to you, Grzegorz, is whom would you see as future observers of Integrity Pacts? We are talking about informal groups, social organizations. However, proposals are also voiced that perhaps the task of monitoring is so demanding that we should engage universities and higher education institutions or commercial companies that could do some tasks. Do you think the future will evolve in that direction? Should it go in that direction? Should we increase the group of potential observers to include somebody else than just social organizations? Is that a chance or rather a threat? Perhaps that will mean that the role of the civic element will decrease in such projects. Over to you. Well, I was trying to waive my 5 minutes and give it to others, but now that you've asked me personally, I'll try to be brief. My answer will be, it depends on the scale, the type of public procurement. If we wanted to repeat a relatively big infrastructural investment like the one that we were monitoring in Poland, it might be a bigger challenge. In our case, we involved engineers, lawyers, etc., etc. If we wanted to observe it and monitor it from A to Z, then it would be necessary to expand the scope, to go beyond solely civic society organizations. It couldn't just be some kind of bottom-up civic movement. It would have to be some organization, and participation of commercial entities would be necessary. Throughout the history of Integrity Pacts, to the best of my knowledge, in Latvia, even before we started our project, the Latvian National Library was included in the pact. Transparency International from Latvia created a consortium with a consulting company to carry out the monitoring and supervision, so that would not be a precedent. However, if that was to take some more rigid regulated form, then I think there should be an act specifying it, and it should be required that if we allow commercial entities in, these should be consortia between such a commercial entity and a CSO or an experts group, a higher education institution. In practice, I would echo the words of Rafa. With big tenders, you either have to focus on some sensitive points. Doing monitoring for 6 or more years of an investment implementation is a huge undertaking. Some of us don't even spend that much time working for one organization, not to mention one project. It seems to me that we have to look at soft points, weak points, sensitive points, and for me, a super sensitive point is the beginning of the investment. For me, the beginning is not the beginning of the tendering process, but the beginning of the planning of such an investment. If we don't engage, if we don't oversee the process from the first step, then it's only going to be difficult and more difficult later on. I think the story of Poraj could be a proof of that. Perhaps Madam Mayor will comment on that. I think that if we were able to mobilize and engage people at an earlier stage, at the stage of feasibility study, if there were some incentives to engage from the investor, from the local community, local authorities, that would help us a lot. I know that you were not a mayor back then, but if local authorities have in their backyard an investment that they cannot fully control, they should pay special attention to engaging, mobilizing local communities to oversee that investment. People usually don't care about things that are happening outside of their backyards. They follow the not in my backyard approach. If I were therefore to say something general about integrity pacts, not only the ones that are local, I would focus on the very beginning. What is happening at the beginning, what is planned to be implemented. On that stage, you can prevent things going south, and B, if you mobilize people at the first stage, then they are more willing to continue their engagement throughout the implementation phase. And to summarize, I do see some room for commercial entities, however, operating hand in hand with non-commercial entities. Otherwise, we will just have yet another auditing product, and it will soon be over-commercialized, and that's not the point in Pacts, is it? Thank you, Grzegorz. I left you, Mahmoud, on purpose to be the last person to take the floor. Could you refer to what was said by your four speakers? Could you give us your perspective at what was said? Do you have any additional reflections in the light of what was mentioned by our panelists? And could you please give us a general overview? Integrity Pact pilot, was that a success in terms of the degree to which we were able to engage citizens in our projects? I remember there were some hard discussions in the past. We didn't know how to approach it. We consulted you. It was hard to translate theory into practice sometimes. It was difficult to build the network of contacts that you mentioned. Indeed, that was a demanding exercise. What's your take on that? Did we pass the test? What else remains to be done? And what is your general opinion, assessment on whether it's worth developing integrity pacts and making them more open to citizens? Over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much for the question. My short answer to that, so this was a pilot, right? So a pilot aims at learning from it. And in terms of that, it was a big success in terms of what we have learned, what works and doesn't work. So I because this was a pilot, it was a success in this sense, right? So for many of the partners on the project, they had a lot of experience with good governance, with policy advice, and with working with governments. But this, for some of them, this was the first time to actually try and engage with citizens and communities and go to the field and try to do that. And I would say at the beginning there was this expert approach to that, right? So let's invite people to a meeting. They are going to show up, and then we have an agenda, and then we discuss, and that's it. It's a smooth process. It's a smooth process. I think one of the biggest learnings from the project is that this is not a meeting. It's a process, and it's a learning process on our side and on the people's side as well, right? So we not all people are active, right? So some of the people that we are trying to engage have already been engaged in other projects, but some of them, this would be the first time to actually um, uh, be engaged in monitoring how public expenses is spent, right? How taxpayers' money, how their own money is being channeled through public administration and spent. So I think it was a learning for us, and it was learning for people as well, and I think it was overall it was a very positive experience, and partners have been open to that learning pathway, I would say. My second point that I would like to stress as well, my take on that when I compare citizen engagement in public contracting within the framework of an IP compared to other social accountability tools like the community scorecard that evaluates public services and aims to improve public services in cooperation with public authorities as well, or citizen report card. I would say citizen engagement in public contracting is much more complicated. So the other social accountability tools or the advice and the learnings based on other social accountability tools cannot be transferred easily because people have more stake in other contexts, right? So if you are offering people health services and you invite them to come and be engaged in improving these services, I think there is a there is something at stake here, more than when you invite them to come and invite them to engage in monitoring a public procurement process that at the end would lead to something that would benefit them, right? So it's a more of a long-term or medium-term benefit to them rather than the short-term improvement of public services. So I think we need to take that into consideration as well, and it's also something that we need to, and we started in the project by documenting all of our experiences, and I think this provides a base on which we can build upon. So my last point, in order not to go beyond the five minutes limit, and I would like to refer also to Gregor's point about the civic culture and civic education, and I think the experience of some partners working with high school students is also a promising experience, right? So it's not only about engaging adults, but trying at the same time to engage adults, but also to engage high school students or university students who will be adults and who will pay taxes and who will have more stake at the end. So if we can instill this sense and culture of citizen engagement in them from the very beginning, I think this would have a positive impact in the future of raising up active citizens who are willing to ask and monitor and engage with public authorities in public procurement, but also in other frontiers. So I stop here and thank you, Marcin, and everyone.
Thank you, Mahmoud. Our conference has come to an end. If anybody wishes to have the last words, now would be the time to raise your hand. If you really feel that you need to comment somebody else's intervention, please don't hesitate to do so. Well, sometimes I didn't hear Marcin that well. Well, now is the time to have a final word. If any of the panelists would like to comment on what's being said, add a penny or two, even though we've said so much already, you can do it right now. I don't see any hands raised, therefore I wish to say a big thank you to all of you. It was a true honor to be your moderator. I would like to thank all the panelists, Mahmoud, Farag, Rafael Garcia, Aceves, Katarzyna Kaźmierczak, Irina, Lonean, and Grzegorz Makowski. I would also like to thank the interpreters, Marta Brudny and Zuzanna Opacińska. The interpreters are very thankful for your kind attention. If you were late for our event, don't worry, we have a recording in Polish and in English, which will be available at our website, Pact Uczciwości Integrity Pact.pl. Stay tuned if you're interested in our project. I hope that soon we will be able to publish the final report from monitoring published by the Batory Foundation, summarizing all the challenges that we were facing throughout the 5 years of our project. And please, I think that you will find it an interesting read, and I hope that it will not be an abuse if I say that we are all here so much in favor of this initiative. We hope that it will become a constant element of the civic life of our states. Even though we are summarizing the pilot project right now, I hope that this will be a first step into making control of public order more effective. And thank you very much once again. Please, it is my recommendation to familiarize yourself with the documents published by the European Commission. They recorded a message for all project participants. And thank you very much indeed. We are in touch. Thank you for your kind attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have the great pleasure to participate and welcome you at this very important event, which marks the successful conclusion of your Integrity Pact pilot project. A closing event for you and a first encounter for me, since I joined DG Regio as a Director for Administrative Capacity Building and Programs Implementation only this September. EU cohesion policy contributes significantly to public investment in Europe and in your country. We need to ensure that Member States make the best possible use of the EU funds and achieve the greatest possible impact on citizens' lives. To do that, we need strong public bodies and good administrative capacity, but also new ways of working by involving all the stakeholders and the civil society. And this is where the idea of the Integrity Pacts is coming from. They aim to improve public procurement and to give civil society organizations a role to play in public decision-making. In 2016, together with Transparency International, we launched the Integrity Pacts pilot project. 18 Integrity Pacts were signed in 11 member states to monitor projects co-financed by the structural and cohesion funds. The Integrity Pacts focus on public procurement as it is of particular concern. It represents 14% of the EU GDP, and around 48% of the European structural and investment funds are spent through public procurement. Yet, in many countries across the EU, we see that citizens lack confidence in the quality and objectiveness of public investment. And this is why tackling fraud and corruption and ensuring efficient and transparent public procurement is so important. Close cooperation between the authorities and the civil society can be an important step in the right direction. And this is the idea and the primary goal of the Integrity Pacts. The overall pilot project of the Integrity Pacts is coming to an end. Most of the projects involved in the pilot are reaching a stage of maturity. We begin to have a clear view of the impact it had on the ground. The final report, lessons learned, and conclusions will be published soon. The Integrity Pacts have already been recognized and praised, and they even received the European Ombudsman Award for Good Administration in 2019. However, this task is by far not over, even more so today, when Europe and the world are facing the worst crisis in a long time. We are in a defining moment for both current and future investments. And we need all the tools that will support our recovery efforts. Integrity Pacts are one of these tools. The Commission will encourage and support the authorities of Member States to use Integrity Pacts in a more systematic fashion in the new programming period. Thank you for your attention and for being part of this project.